Hello, I'm Ricky Dean Wittrigg, and this is The Deep Dive. Today, we'll meet one of the people that makes our community so special. You may know them very well, or you may not know them at all. But either way, we're going to take a deep conversational dive with them and hear what makes them so unique and so interesting. So here we go on our deep dive of the day. Today, we have a friend of mine, Chris Nelson, who is many things, many things. I met him years ago, and he is the state archaeologist. He's a martial artist. He is a author of a fantastic book that we're going to get to. He is now an actor because of that. He is a producer. His world has become fascinating, and I might say so. Chris, how are you doing today, brother?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Thanks for joining
All
us
right.
today. There is so much material in the story of you and the book, but I want to get to you today and talk about, how did you get to the archaeology point, and how did that lead to other things, and then eventually how did you get to this book, which is about, as I understand it, and can relay it, the only Black manufacturer of automobiles in the country.
Yes.
Would that be the world also? I mean, or do you?
At the time, there is at least one company in I think Nigeria that started like 5, maybe 6 years ago now. But at the time that I originally did the research back in like 2008, 2009, it was the only one known in the world.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, how did you? I know you have a family, and you are living here in Watertown, I believe. And how did you
And
get to the
Lebanon.
archaeology side? How'd that happen? How did you choose archaeology?
Oh boy. Well, honestly, I've always been interested in history. And I joined the military in 1990. And while I was, doing the military thing, I kept getting deployed to different places and everything. And I was doing some United Nations work in the former Yugoslavia during the Bosnian War and all of that. And I don't even know how this happened, but it has worked out in my favor. But the chaplain that was attached to our battalion picked 10 people. And somehow my name was one of those 10 people that got picked to put down the weapons and all the gear, and we went to Greece. And we followed the Ignatian way, which was, the path that St. Paul did on his first
What?
journey.
Okay.
And literally
Okay.
going to these cities of the Bible, like Corinth and Thessalonica, and all of that. And then we get to this one city, Philippi. It's no longer a city. It was literally like we're in a bus. We stop on the road, and all of a sudden we're looking down at all these like standing columns and all of that. And they're like, "Let's go. We're going to walk through this." Now this is ruins of a city, and every single rock, every artifact had a little number on it, where archaeologists had gone and dug this city back out of the ground because it was near a river and everything, and like sediments had buried it because it hadn't been a city in like 2,000 years. Right now, this is a city where St. Paul was in prison, and the earthquake came and opened the prison. That prison's still there. I mean, it's just like I was so amazed, and I fell in love with archaeology. And who knew after the military and some other things that I did in between that I would end up going to school for history first to be a high school teacher. Then, like after a couple of years of that, I was like, I really, really want to be an archaeologist. And I ended up going to get my first degree in archaeology based on a trip to Greece. So, and it was just fortuitous that that ever happened.
You just got plucked out of nowhere, and they just
Yeah,
random people, and let's go to Greece. What the heck?
yeah, like 1,500 people, and like they picked 10 people, and I'm one of them. And it was such a great thing because I mean, I got to walk these really ancient streets and these buildings and all of that. And then we got to Philippi, and I just fell absolutely in love with archaeology. And of course, at that time, I didn't realize how much archaeology was done in North America. You kind of think Roman, Greek, Egyptian, all of those areas. And like, we have archaeology going on around us all the time right here in the United States. I mean, there are federal laws that require it. And like, I'll make this as short as possible. This came about because of the interstate system. All right. So in the 50s, we were building interstates, and like interstates obviously have to go through cities. they didn't leave room for interstates when they built cities because, well, nobody conceived of something this big, right? So did they go through the rich neighborhoods and tear down houses? No. They went through these ethnic neighborhoods and everything, and
Yep.
they destroyed these people's entire history pretty much that they brought with them because the buildings were built in their style from their home country and all of that. And then it dispersed these peoples. And then finally in 1966, Congress was like, maybe we shouldn't do that. We're going to make a law that if there's a federal action, like federal money being spent, or it requires a federal permit or on federal property, we're going to have people just check first, make sure it's not something really super important. So we don't save every site we find, but if it's something that meets the criteria to be considered significant, we look at that. That's what I do today is for USDA. I am the state archaeologist for USDA activities, specifically the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And we give a lot of grants to private landowners. We're not working with corporations and stuff. It's just private folks like you. And, they have a stream going through their property and it's eroding a lot of their property away. Hey, we can help you engineer how to put stream bank stabilization up. And then if you apply for grants, we might be able to help you fund it. Great job. For the most part, people love us because we're helping people. And I love it. I really, really enjoy that. But that all came about from this 1966 law that just said we have to consider our actions, to make sure we're not affecting something significant.
Pretty progressive, actually. And
It
something
is.
really
It
needed.
is.
Really needed.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, every time you see those orange barrels along the interstate, we were there first. Something as simple as a cell tower, that little 100-foot by 100-foot area, archaeologists were there first. I mean, just checking it out, making sure there's not something there. So we work with, all the tribes. And of course, we don't have resident tribes here in Tennessee anymore, but I work with 20 tribes that once called Tennessee home because they have things through oral history that we don't have in our records here at the state. So I write letters to them. I consult with them, say, hey, here's an area we plan on doing a project. Do you have any concerns for sacred sites or whatever? And most of the time it's not, because we're a conservation agency and a lot of our projects are really small most of the time, but every once in a while there's something. And they'll say, can you go do a field survey, make sure there's not something there, or whatever. Or they might just ask us to move it. Like, hey, can you move that livestock pipeline over a little bit? And then we just play the whole, throwing darts at a dartboard game. Like, how's this? Nope. How's this? Perfect. So then we proceed with the project. Yeah, it's a process. It's neat being able to talk to people from other nations because, well, most people don't realize that federally recognized tribes are sovereign nations that live within the boundaries of the United States.
Even though we haven't treated them very well and moved a lot,
we
still.
haven't. And that makes my job a little tougher because I've worked for years earning those.
I don't trust you. You're part of the government. I'm not going to trust you.
I'm with the government. I'm here to help you, right?
Well, what's the coolest thing you've ever found or been associated with outside of this? You did thousands of hours of research for your book, but what else have you found?
I did a project in Virginia once for the Virginia Department of Transportation because there was an older bridge across the Slate River and they needed to replace the bridge. So instead of just tearing the bridge down and building in the same spot, how they usually do, they put it parallel to it, right beside it. And they were like, we feel like there might be something there, or something. And so obviously they called companies in to bid on projects and everything. And my company ended up bidding on the project and winning. And I go in there and I'm leading the crew and there was the remains of an old dam there. Or at least it looked like it could have been. But we weren't completely sure at first, but it was just piles of rock. It was kind of linear. And so then the dam had breached toward one end. So the water kind of would get rerouted where the breach was, but then water always finds its way back to its original path. Sure. So it would go for, 200, 300 feet, and then it found its way back to the original bank again. It carried sediments around with it. It built a sandbar, which then basically created a pond in the middle of the river. The sandbar trapped water in there. So I'm looking in this pond and I'm seeing these shadows. And I'm like, guys, there's something in there. They're like, oh, a tree just fell. It's in there. I'm like, no, there's something in there. I'm like, there's two lines and they look too parallel to be two trees that fell. And I finally convinced them, hey, there might be something here. We need to do a little bit more work on this. So since it wasn't an enclosed pond, I was able to take big pumps in, drain the pond, onto the adjacent floodplain and then filter through and go back into the river eventually. And like these perfectly square, like 14-inch by 14-inch timbers were exposed. And they were underwater the entire time, so they were still preserved. Even the wooden dowel pins that put these things together were still preserved. So we start really doing the research in it, and it turns out it was an old mill that had been built in the 1750s. Now, this mill was one of like 5 mills along that river, and in 1800, a court case went to the Supreme Court. John Marshall himself oversaw this case where a canal company wanted to make that river navigable. Well, these dams went all the way across, and they're like, you can't get canal boats through without portage and all of that, and they're all loaded down, so you can't do that. So they tried to make these mill owners tear down their dams, rebuild new dams with locks, make them run the locks at their own dime. And they're like, no, we're not doing this. So we went all the way to the Supreme Court. They won. It went back in like 1820 and then like in 1832, 3 different times. It stood up every single time. That court case is still cited today when there comes eminent domain rights when it comes to water, because these mill owners were like, under King's law, remember, these were built in the 1750s.
Right.
They owned the water, the bedrock, everything under the stream, and it held up in court. So
Wow.
this ended up being the one mill that they didn't know where it was anymore. They knew somewhat where it was, but I found what was remaining. So I tore part of that dam apart, and under the water line, there were still wooden timbers because they were preserved. So it was what was called a timber crib dam, where it was basically like a log cabin, but they built it up.
Interlock.
Yeah. Then all the wood that was above the water rotted, and the rocks just kind of spread out. I mean, it was cool. I found hooks off of like the scales where they would hang the bags of flour and stuff like that to weigh it on the scales and everything. I found that kind of stuff, big giant pieces of cast iron gears, and yeah, it was pretty neat. That's my favorite.
Wow.
That's
a good one. That's a really
yeah. My report, which people usually don't look at our technical reports, actually ended up being part of a book about that river. And so yeah,
That's really rewarding. That's going to be really rewarding.
Very neat discovery, yeah. So, but that's just one example of how that 1966 law has helped us be able to recognize these things. And they put the bridge like on the other side. They were able to avoid that because it was the remains of something really important to American history, even pre-American history.
Did they expose it? It was ever exposed?
No. If they exposed it, it would just rot. It would rot. So it ended up being those 2 timbers were where the big wheel was, the water wheel.
Right.
There was a lower spot in the dam where the water came through like a raceway and hit the wheel. And those 2 timbers were the bottom timbers that held up where the axle was for the giant wheel. So, I mean, it was a really neat discovery.
Well, how did that lead eventually to your book? I mean, how'd your life progress to the point that you had the book?
All right. Well, the book was already out before I ever made that discovery. So what happened was I have 3 degrees in archaeology. Like I said, I started on history, then I got 3 degrees in archaeology. So my first one was in prehistoric archaeology. Then I went on for historic period archaeology. And while I was doing my thesis for historic period archaeology, it ended up being on a canal site. Yeah, of all things, my career just always ties back together. It circles back. And during that research, I kept running across this thing called industrial archaeology. I'm like, what is that? I don't even know. And it turns out I was already doing it because anything to do with the Industrial Revolution, including transportation, falls under industrial archaeology. Technology changes quickly, right? And sometimes things don't get recorded fully and everything. So we actually tried to piece all of technology together because, I mean, let's face it, we've all seen a building built at a factory for a specific function. Then the technology changes 20 years later. They tear the building down. So that's my job as an industrial archaeologist, historian. We try to record all of that before it's gone. Now, modern times, we have pretty good documentation. We can kind of piece things back together. But 1700s, 1800s, it wasn't so well documented. And so, yeah, that's part of what I do for industrial archaeology. So when I discovered that there was a school in the United States that taught that, because there's only 2 schools in the world that teach that, and one of them is up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So I went up to Michigan Tech and went to their industrial archaeology program. And basically, it was kind of like, hey, we don't really have money to do big digs and excavations and stuff, so go find some grants. And I'm like, well, industrial archaeology is a combination of archaeology and history. I've already done a thesis in archaeology that was industrial. I'm like, what if I go more for the historical side? So my advisor was like, what do you have in mind? So I tell him where I grew up, 18 miles away in the next town over, there was a black owned auto manufacturer. And he was like, what? He's like, I've never heard of such a thing. Turns out my advisor actually wrote and edited books about vintage cars, and he'd never even heard of this
He
story.
did, no clue.
And so I told him a little bit.
This was oral history that you picked up from the people of Greenville.
Yes.
It's Greenville, right?
Greenfield.
Greenfield, okay.
Yes. So that's in Southern Ohio. And so, yeah, I grew up hearing this oral history, thought I kind of knew it and everything. And that's what I pitched. He was like, go for it. So I get into the research and, I knew mainly, in 1915, this black man built a car and became the first to do so. Well, it turns out this company history was way, way longer. And I'd always knew that the second generation of the family, the guy who built the car, also went to Ohio State University. And I knew he was the first black football player on their team. But I had a team photo that was like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a newspaper that had been photocopied. So it was really grainy.
Kind of grainy at that point.
Yeah, you can imagine. So I'm sitting in the Ohio State University archive, and I say, I need to get a clean copy of this photo. They're like, oh, it's going to take us a little while to find this. Or like, here's some other stuff from that period to look through while we're looking. So I pulled up a yearbook from like 1890 or 1891. I think it was 1891. And I'm flipping through it. I see my guy's name there. And I'm like, oh, cool. Here's something. President of the class of 1893. And at that moment, my mind is like blown. Like, this story is so much bigger than what anybody's ever really talked. And at that point, my research strategy just kind of changed because being an industrial archaeologist and historian, I thought everybody tells the story of the family. They built cars, they built carriages for, but then built buses and trucks, but nobody tells the technical details of those things. So that's what I started out was telling technical details of all the different vehicles they built, their factory, and all of that. And then all of a sudden I make this kind of discovery, and I was like, whoa, now I have to tell the whole family history pretty much. So I started sprinkling that kind of stuff. So my 50-page minimum thesis ended up being 300 plus pages. And the story was amazing. I mean, it turned out absolutely amazing. And my advisor, by the time I was done, he sat there and pointed at me. He was like, you'd be an idiot not to put this out to the public. Because I just found so many color barriers that these folks broke and everything along the way, and it's just like I said, you don't have to be interested in cars. There's a little bit of everything in their story, especially 74 years in business through 3 generations of the family. And each generation added their own elements. And it just, yeah, it was amazing. So I ended up pretty much putting my thesis out as the first edition of the book. So it was really technical. It was good. The story was in there, but it was really, really technical. So kind of sat on that for a while.
And then, so you got involved with the family. You tracked down some of the actual remaining family members and sought them out, and the story kept getting bigger, and it's really on places you didn't imagine, I'm pretty sure.
Well, yeah, that happened eventually. Like I said, the first edition was really an adaptation of my thesis, and it was supposed to be more. So I was even advised, don't go seek out all the family and all of that at this point, because what you're doing is more technical side and everything. So like I said, I just kind of sprinkled in some of the family history. Well, apparently it was enough, because fast forward like 12 years, and in 2021, the first 2 generations of that family to run the company got inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame, Global Hall of Fame in Detroit. So I get invited up there for that, because obviously my book was part of getting them there, right? Getting them recognized and everything. So we're really trying to promote more diversity and everything in the automotive industry. So of course, why not induct the first Black person to ever manufacture?
Only, first and only.
Right, right. So, I'm up there and things are going really well. Patterson family comes in and I meet them. And just like we just hit it off. We established this relationship and everything. I end up meeting people from a film production company who talks to me about, hey, we'd like to make a movie out of this. I'm like, gee, twist my arm, right? So, but then, as much as I know or knew at that time about the story, they're like, so tell me about the personal traits of these people. And I'm like, huh, that's something that wasn't part of my research. They're like, we're going to need that to be able to write a movie script. So what happened was I went back through my 2,000 hours of research. I didn't have to collect all of it this time. It was, I got it all sitting here, right? But I pulled out those kind of details that weren't important to me before for what I was doing. And I started piecing it together and piecing it together. And I mean, like, new things popped up because it would lead me in new directions. The family gave me tips like you would never find in a book or in any kind of records. And it was just like, it was amazing. And I followed every lead that was given to me, no matter how crazy it sounded sometimes, stuff I'd find on the internet. I'm like, oh, well, I know that's not true, but I'd follow it because you never know where they got the information. And it would end up leading me somewhere else. And I mean, I chased information all over the United States from lots and lots of different people that helped me along the way. And I ended up putting out a second edition of the book in September 2022 because there was so much extra information that the book is now double what it was originally. And I mean, the story, it has it all. I mean, it's got mysterious deaths in it. It's got addiction. It's got like secret divorces. I mean, it talks about the struggles that this family had as a Black owned company. I mean, obviously there were extra obstacles at that time, even today, really, but especially at that time. I mean, I like to prefer to talk more about that time. Kind of like I don't really use the term African American. I use Black pretty consistently because the term African American didn't exist at that time.
That word is recent.
I say Black, unless I quoted something in the book where I have to say like Negro Business League, or sometimes I'm quoting somebody that said collared. I don't use that terminology on my own. But yeah, it's just the story just ended up being so drawn out and amazing. And I mean, I found so much stuff and from the family and from different records, different avenues that showed up, some leads. Yeah, and it just ended up being an amazing story. So now I'll go ahead and throw this in there that it's being made into a movie and a documentary because we want to make sure we tell the absolute true story. Because in the movie, we have to fill in gaps and stuff because we don't know everything. Right. And that's one of the things in the book is if I didn't know, I don't say it. Or I may say, I don't know for sure, but it may have been this, or this that led them to this point. So I give the reader options to form their own opinion of, yeah, it probably happened like that. If I don't know it as fact, I did not state it.
Well, it's amazing, and thank you for the copy of the book. I haven't got to read it yet, but it's on my reading list. But I actually leafed through it, and it's amazing detail. You've got a lot of photography in there, but it's a story that needed to be told, and it's now, like I said, you've turned it into a documentary and a movie. And
coming soon.
So one other thing that you shared with me was that you were a combat veteran. You were right in the midst of all that, and that this book gave you some purpose and gave you some direction and really helped you heal. I would use that word.
Yes. So, I mean, I'd been out of the Army for close to a decade. And obviously I had some effects, from PTSD, and all of that, but it was mostly manageable. And just some events in my life about almost a decade later just kind of triggered it into full blown PTSD. I mean, I was not in a good place in my life. And it just happened to align with the years that I went to graduate school where I was doing this thesis research. And on top of the counseling and the meds they had me on, I was able to focus so much energy into this one story that it helped really pull me out of that dark place that I was in. I mean, without this story, I probably wouldn't be here today. I mean, that's speaking honestly. Uh, and I don't know, it's part of me at this point. And I'm not an author. Like I said, I write technical reports all the time.
All evidence to the contrary. I think you are an author. Okay, let's just, yeah.
I think my passion and connection to this story makes it so readable that people feel the energy. And it actually turned out being a really good narrative. I mean, I'll admit, somebody will ask me a question sometimes about something that's in the book, and I'm like, oh, I haven't thought about that aspect for a little while. I don't want to tell you wrong, so I'm going to look it up real quick. And I'll catch myself like 10, 12 pages later reading. And I'm like, wait a minute, who wrote this? But I mean, it's not the best book out there in the world, but the story is inspiring. It's not necessarily my writing. You feel my passion, but I mean, and it's true. It's truly nonfiction. I mean, like I said, there's nothing that's untrue, knowingly untrue in it. I have like 1,700 documents that were either written by one of the Patterson family or directly about them during their time. They closed down in 1939, and then they kind of disappeared out of history for about 40 years, roughly, except for a small interview here and there. And then in 1980 or so, things started popping up with them again. But it's kind of like the telephone game where you pass it along and it keeps changing a little bit. So that's kind of what happened to the oral history, right? So I was like, I'm going to eliminate all those later sources. I stuck to 1939 and before on probably 95% of my sources, telling it in their own words. And through family oral history, I mean, like, it just came together. I mean, I'm shocked at how much more there was to the story than what I grew up hearing.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking, I mean, I'm talking about breaking collar barriers, not just in sports. Like I said, he was the first black football player at Ohio State, but then also in education, politics. I mean, this guy was so good of a businessman that Booker T. Washington himself sought this guy out to help him found the Negro Business League down at Tuskegee. All right.
Wow.
Now, Booker T. Washington did not like Northern businessmen, white or black, honestly. And we're talking about a Northern businessman in Ohio, right? But he kind of knew that he was such a good businessman that he's like, he has to be part of this group. So he ended up being vice president for the first decade of the league under Booker T. Washington. But let me clarify that, why he didn't really like the Northern business. The North was more industrialized.
Yes.
And the South was more agricultural. So
right.
Tuskegee and the Negro Business League and everything was more about Southern businessmen, more agricultural based things. So the industrial North was mostly white. I mean, I'll throw a fact out for you to put that in perspective.
So, Chris, I do have a question. So, you shared with me that this has changed your life, and you talked about some of the things that have happened to you since the production. You've actually become an actor,
Yes.
and you brush shoulders with a tremendous amount of celebrities. You've been in multiple films, and all because of this book.
Yeah.
You're on IMDb. You're the real deal, dude.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying. And you know what? That came out because of this whole movie business, because I had no experience in the film industry. And, the producer I was working with at the time was like, you really need to start building up a portfolio a little bit and everything. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I watch movies,
I
that's
like
not
movies.
right. Because it's really hard to ask an investor to hand over millions of dollars to somebody that has zero experience, right? And so, like, hey, I'm producing a short film out here in LA right now. It's like, I can sign you on as associate producer. So I did that. And it's like, once I got into that circle, then I had skill sets like being an archaeologist. I'm an archaeology consultant on a feature film that was shot in Michigan. That was a mummy movie, not creepy, mummy movie, but it was very historic. set for Victorian period England and everything. And, I know quite a bit about Egypt. Uh, and, I was able to help out with that. So, I mean, like, all my experiences in life just kind of came into this, and I was able to do different things. So, I was executive producer on a short film in North Carolina called The Grief Counselor. And it was about a combat veteran who had PTSD. And we told it from a female perspective because there are a lot of combat females now.
Yeah.
And, it's like, let's tell this from a different perspective here to bring more awareness to that side of things, that females are involved in this too. And she's a grief counselor for other people who have PTSD or other grief issues and all of that. And so I was like, I'm like, this is really cool. I wanted to be on set for filming. So I go down for a couple of days, and like they're the first day, and they're like, hey, does anybody know a local person that can just be an extra tomorrow? And I'm like, you just need somebody to sit in the lobby of the therapist office? I'm like, I do that all the time. Like, you would do that.
Oh, yeah, I do that. Sure.
Yeah. So we're like, all right, wear this tomorrow. So I had to go shopping real quick and buy, a nice polo and everything to come in. And like, so the director comes up the next morning. He's like, hey, you're executive producer. The SAG rules don't apply. We're going to give you a speaking role. And I'm like, what? I'm like, I'm not a professional actor. I can't memorize lines. And they're like, oh no, it's all improv. I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
so it scared me to death. It took me so far out of my comfort zone. I'm sitting across from a professional actress. She says something, I'm supposed to respond, and I'm like drooling pretty much, like, oh, I don't know what to say. So cut, let's do it again. We did it like 6 times. I'm like, all right, now I know what she's going to say. So I'm ready. She said something different all 6 times. But by the time I was flying back to Nashville, I was replaying all those events in my mind. And I was like, I actually enjoyed being taken out of my comfort zone.
Ah.
And I came back to Nashville, and the very next thing I was in was the big Nicole Kidman film that we just filmed here in early 2023. So like I just dove straight in. Yeah, I was doing background, but at this point I've done background, I've done speaking roles, I've produced more films. I'm even producing a podcast, not this one, Rick, but a fictional podcast. And I'm in commercials. But I'm trying to keep my portfolio built up and everything. And it made it a whole lot easier when you're asking for a lot of money to make a movie.
Sure. You got the cred. You got the street cred or the whatever cred, movie cred.
Right. It's like, this is somebody that's very involved. My gosh, one of the biggest thrills was my favorite Netflix show, Cobra Kai. Martial artist, right?
Yes.
Obviously, we grew up with Karate Kid and all of that. Now they have Cobra Kai, which expands on that story. And like, I gotta be in one scene. It's the final season. So I, keep flying down there. Nothing. I'm like, what's wrong? Everything I applied to in Nashville, like people are calling me, and even people I don't apply to call me up. Hey, I hear that, you might be available for this. I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? I just couldn't seem to break in. And then finally, they let me in. I was like 10 days long. Oh boy. I'm like, if I say no, there might not be another chance. So I go down, I get a film with some of my like childhood legends,
Ralph Macchio what's his?
Ralph Macchio, William Zabka, Martin Kove. All of those guys, they're all there, and I'm filming with them, and it was so much fun. So what happened was, I'm down there just having fun, and I'd been kind of courted by a Nashville-based studio, and I could feel my phone just vibrating, either ringing, text messages, everything. And they're like, we got to do this movie. We got to do this movie. And after a few years of, just kind of working toward it, but nothing really substantial.
You had some interest from LA, but nothing really happened. And then you had a local production company, because Nashville's becoming more of a Bollywood or Hollywood. I don't know what you want to call it. And it's really on the film scene. So,
yeah, definitely.
Chris, that's all the time we got for today, man. I could chat this out with you for another 2 hours. So would you come back and tell us more about the book and your acting and production crew and all the things that you've got going?
Absolutely.
Fascinating story. And I know, more people want to know about your your issue with PTSD. I mean, you are a light in my mind for a lot of our military people who are struggling with that.
Mhm.
And you made it out, man. You conquered
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And that's a shining light for not only the military, but all of us that struggle with mental illness and the things that happen. So, man, I really appreciate you being with us today. Super fun. Can't wait
All
till the
right.
movie
Thank
comes
you.
out. And I hope to see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks
brother.
for having me.
Folks, check in with us on Facebook. We are on X, which I don't know anything about. We're also on Instagram. So if you want to learn more about Chris, it'll be a few episodes out, but we'll do it. Have a good day. Back. Chris and I were just discussing after our podcast recording that we didn't mention his book. Would you show him your book, Chris? And
Here we go.
it is. What's the name of it there?
The C.R. Patterson and Sons Company, Black Pioneers in the Vehicle Building Industry, 1865 to 1939. This is the 2022 second edition.
Hey, and
So
what's the name of the movie?
the movie is right now, the working title is Driven, and it's going to be put together by Bright Morning Star Films in Nashville. So
Perfect.
with me being one of the executive producers, and I have a whole cadre of other producers, and a bunch of
Of course.
filmmakers are excited about this. They were hungry, and I had
Are-
no problem signing with them.
Are you on Amazon?
I am on Amazon.
So if they want to get your book, they can go to Amazon and
Yep.
then type in the Patterson, and it'll come up with your name. Or
It'll show up. If
Chris
it doesn't
Nelson
have
is
this
the author.
cover on it, it's not the right one.
yeah,
old
this is
one's
the big
still
one.
on
This is the new one,
Amazon.
the second edition. Well,
Yes.
folks, thanks for taking us back for a moment. Check us back on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks.
As we wrap up another insightful episode of the Deep Dive, I want to express my sincere gratitude to the excellent guests we had today and also our loyal listeners. Special thanks go to our sponsors, Fire Pit Art, the best fire pits on the planet, and Powder Coat Art for high quality metal powder coating. If you've enjoyed this, please connect with us on social media and tell your friends how much you enjoyed the program. And always remember, when you want to find your way home, it's always bubbles up. Thanks. Have a good day.